Jordan is one of a handful of athletes who are part of a revolution in the sports industry, putting athletes at the top of the financial pyramid with multi-million-dollar contracts and endorsements. A far cry from as recently as the 1970s, when many pro players worked two jobs to make ends meet. So how did athletes come to own such a big piece of the sports industry pie? WSJ Sports senior special writer Matthew Futterman has a new book called Players, the story of sports and money and the visionaries who fought to create a revolution. And Matt joins us now. Welcome, Matt. Congratulations on your book.
Thanks very much.
It's so hard to believe that as recently as the 70s, some top pros were working two jobs. Who were some of these people?
Well, the big one that comes to mind is Roger Staubach, who was the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. And in 1971, he was selling real estate in the off-season, commercial real estate, because he was only making $25,000 a year. When he first told me that story, it sort of stuck in my head, and I told my dad, and my dad, who was, at the time was a government lawyer, and he said, that's what I was making in 1971.
How can that be?
Right, which is kind of astounding, because now Tony Romo, the Dallas Cowboys starting quarterback, plays under a contract worth $120 million.
Amazing. And so who were some of these visionaries that you write about that turned that around for the players?
So what I wanted to do was sort of tell the story of modern sports and how we got to this place where sports is this sort of inspirational, creative, ubiquitous thing that sometimes is sort of crass and over-commercialized and annoys us. And to do that, I sort of wanted to go back to the beginning, and I think the name that kept coming up was a guy named Mark McCormick, who was really the first real sports agent. His main client was Arnold Palmer. And, you know, McCormick had this idea that it wasn't just about making himself rich, although he wanted to do that. It wasn't just about that, but he felt like if he could get more money into the pocket of his athletes, there would be, they would have more time to train, and they would get better, and the competition would get better. And that would make people want to go see these sports more often and put them on TV, and money would filter through the system, and their jobs would become more desirable and create more competition for those jobs. And the whole cycle would sort of snowball on itself.
And he was right about that.
Yeah, he was completely right about that.
Yeah.
I mean, sports is so much, a lot of people say money ruins sports, but money, I think, really made sports what they are today. I mean, these athletes now are so finely tuned. The quality of the competition is so much better than it was 25, 30, 40 years ago. It's really unrecognizable.
Hey, look, someone's going to be making a lot of money off sports. It might as well be the athletes and the players with the short careers, right?
Right. I mean, but and the interesting thing is that 50 years ago, nobody was making money off sports. So one of the reasons I think McCormick, who went on to found the company IMG, one of the reasons he was so successful was he sort of made this argument, look, everybody's going to get rich if we do this the right way.
And so who was the person that taught the sports industry the crucial lesson about supply and demand?
So Marvin Miller is the executive director of the Baseball Players Association, and you know, he like most people on that side of the fence, they thought this thing called the reserve clause, which bound a player to his team for his entire career, was just abhorrent. It was essentially, you know, a plantation-style sport. And Miller spent a lot of time trying to convince the players that free agency would be good for them. And the reaction he got was, if I'm a free agent, it means I'm unemployed. And what eventually happened is he convinced one guy, basically, that no, those guys are in the minor leagues, they can't replace you. You're in the major leagues. You're really good at baseball.
You're in demand.
So good. You're in demand.
Yeah.
And so when he finally got Catfish Hunter as a free agent, which happened sort of by accident.
Was he the first athlete to go free?
He was the first, baseball's first free agent. And all of a sudden he signs a contract in 1974 that is worth $3.5 million. And that's 15 times greater than the next highest contract at the time.
Good for him. Now tell us about the NFL. How did it become the juggernaut it is today?
Well, it was pretty calculated on the NFL's part. The NFL in the 70s, and a lot of people have forgotten this, was a bit of a dud. The games were very low scoring. There were lots of shutouts. It was sort of very defensive, lots of running. And the NFL made a very calculated decision in the 1970s and early 80s to change the rules and make it much easier for quarterbacks to pass the ball. Offensive linemen were allowed to extend their arms, and wide wide receivers couldn't be basically assaulted at the line of scrimmage, and it really opened things up. The NFL made this calculated decision that this was a game that was going to be all about the quarterbacks, that they were going to be the stars of the show.
And that exploded the game.
That exploded everything. It changed the way offense was played.
I also want to get to something you wrote about, the Nikeization of sports. I mean, we saw Michael Jordan there at the beginning. Was he the precursor to these huge endorsement deals that defined athletes?
I mean, he was sort of the one that really, I think, became the kind of tipping point, because Nike has its sort of aha moment with Michael Jordan, where it realizes that the best way to sell its shoes and its merchandise is not to talk about the technical attributes of those shoes, but to essentially turn the people that are wearing their equipment into superheroes. And that's what they did with Michael Jordan. He became sort of this superhero, this cartoon character. And the problem with that is he became something of a legend, and some of the legends weren't true. And so I think it encouraged other athletes to say, well, what's my legend? And that's when you get into the legends like Lance Armstrong, who, you know, I beat cancer and won 7 Tour de France because I was on my bike 6 hours a day.
Corrupted
well, turns out he was on a few other things besides his bike 6 hours a day.
And finally, Matt, I want to ask you, you believe the U.S. women's soccer team should boycott the Summer Olympics. Why is that?
Well, I think, you know, time and again, as I was researching this book and writing about these things, athletes get what they want when they finally say, no, we're not going to play. Go try and do it without us. You really have to push management to the point where they understand that you're serious.
So this is how they could get equal pay.
And you have to do it at a point when it's important. I mean, the baseball players skipped the 1994 World Series. Stan Smith, the defending champion of Wimbledon, he walked out and led a boycott of 80 players in 1973.
All right.
Those are things that really make the difference.
We'll see what happens. I bet the U.S. women's soccer team is listening to you right now, Matt Futterman, so we'll see.
I hope so.
That'd be great. Thank you so much for talking to us
Thanks
today.
for having me.